The Porsche Macan is the best driving mid-size SUV on the market, but up until this point, I've always recommended the Macan S, particularly after the facelift that saw it pinch the GTS's 2.9 litre V6, a phenomenal engine that Porsche shares with Audi RS. The GTS is about 30 grand more expensive than the Macan S. So in today's video, I'm going to do a detailed breakdown of the GTS version that punters seem to prefer, at least if you go off what you see driving down the road here in Sydney. Is there some magic to the GTS? Is this really the Macan that you should buy? Or should you save your cash and go for a nicely optioned Macan S instead? I'm going to tell you the answers to all those questions in this review, but before we get started, hit subscribe below. Now, the Macan is a Porsche, but it is built on the Volkswagen Group's MLB premium combustion architecture. That being said, once upon a time, a journalist asked a senior product manager for this car at Porsche, how much does it share with an Audi Q5? And the answer was, it would have been cheaper to start from scratch. And I think that pretty much tells you what it's like to sit in and to drive in the Porsche Macan. It's no Audi Q5. Not that that car is bad, because we actually rate it pretty well. It's just that Porsche have changed so much under the skin and here in the cabin of the Macan, and you can really tell. Porsche keeps a lot of their own bits that they don't let Volkswagen have access to, right down to the nifty little kind of faux key that you use to start the car here in the Macan. That's kind of a whimsical touch that you use every time you jump in, and that's pretty cool. There's also the fact that the instrument cluster doesn't go down the path of being fully digital like most vehicles do in this day and age. There is a color screen off to the right hand side, which you can put a map or your media and stuff into, but your tachometer is fully analog. That looks awesome. And here in the GTS, it's also finished in red, just like the exterior of the car. You'll also notice a ton of red highlights throughout the interior, including stitching across the leather dashboard and door tops and around the seats. These are the 18-way sport seats, which are standard in this car, but you can option in the rest of the Macan lineup too, and they are phenomenal. They're incredibly comfortable. They're almost infinitely adjustable. All of the bladders and bolsters can be moved at the bottom and the top, and so you really are held in during cornering, but even just when you're cruising on the highway, you feel great. You're really cosseted by these seats, and it's worth doing. This interior has gone for pretty much full sport, so we've got black leather and Alcantara in the seat and carbon fiber as the extended trim finishes, but you can pretty much make the Macan whatever you want. You can go for light interiors, you can go for two tones, you can have aluminium, you can have more leather on the dash, you can have wood. You can make it what you like, but I think a lot of people will like the combination on this particular test car that I'm looking at today. Now, the only transmission is a PDK, but we've got metal paddle shifters behind this steering wheel and a Manatino dial down here for drive modes, which is pretty cool. Lots of touch-based controls down here on the center console, which does get pretty badly marked by fingerprints, unfortunately. But the touchscreen up here is smartly organized, it's Porsche's own, and it's got wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. But you also get a Bose premium stereo, which sounds really good, clear and crisp, plus a panoramic sunroof if you option one into the car, and lots of GTS detailing, including here on the headrests. Now, if you take a Macan S, it's a lot less overtly sporty. You can still get most of the same interior combinations here in the GTS, but you don't have stuff glaring at you like GTS on the headrests, red seat belts, all of that sort of stuff. It's a bit more of a subtle spec. Some people will prefer that, and some people will want to go for the GTS, which really reminds you that it's Porsche. Now, up front, the Macan GTS feels driver-focused and quite tight, and it's the same here in the back. Compared to a vehicle like a GLC or a BMW X3, the Macan is a lot smaller, partially to make it drive better. What that means is here in the second row, it's just not as spacious. I tend to drive with my seat a bit further forward than most people, which is better for car control, but I'm still 6 foot tall, and you can see that I fit behind my own driving position absolutely fine. I've got enough leg room. Headroom's okay, I've got about an inch. This car's got less headroom than most because it has the optional panoramic sunroof, but getting someone into the center is going to be a pretty big ask, especially because the hump in the floor is massive. But for transporting 4 adults, or perhaps more realistically, 2 adults and 2 kids that aren't too old or tall, the Macan is going to be totally fine. You've got air vents here, you've got temperature control, 2 USB-C ports for those in the back. You still get lovely leather-lined doors and a flip-down armrest here and a ski pass-through to the boot. So it's pretty fully featured here in the back. It's just good to go into it knowing that the Macan's not the biggest vehicle in the segment, and that's on purpose. Coming around the back of the Macan GTS, you kind of reflect that this one is specified in one of the ways you'd want to do a GTS. This is carmine red, classic Porsche color, and we've got the big beefy 21-inch wheels finished in matte black as well, and they look really good. To be honest, red over black usually isn't my kind of thing. You'd know that if you're a subscriber, but the Macan kind of pulls it off. It has that sort of engorged hot hatch feel to it, which I don't mind. Really like this full width light bar here that does light up at night. You've got your Macan GTS lettering, or you can have Porsche take that off and let it be a little bit more subtle. And down here, we've got the sport exhaust system on this car with sport tailpipes finished in black. And it all just finishes it off quite nicely, I reckon. Now, behind this power tailgate, which gets out of your way relatively quickly, you find 488 litres of space. And as you can see, it's pretty much a big square box. This vehicle is on air suspension, so you're able to lower the whole thing from right here in the boot, which is convenient if you've got something very heavy to put into the car. Underneath the boot floor, you do find a collapsible spare wheel, which in itself is actually quite surprising because a lot of this car's rivals have no spare at all. There's a netted area over here as well, and the back seats fold 40-20-40, so you can still seat 4 adults, but carry something quite long down the middle of them. While the Macan can actually be relatively good value for money to buy in certain specifications, Porsche does sting you when it comes to ownership costs, particularly servicing, because there's no cap price servicing on the Porsche Macan from the factory. Instead, you have to go to individual dealerships to find out how much this vehicle costs to service, and the answer is a lot. Servicing a Macan GTS over 5 years will cost you just shy of $5,000 at current prices. And its cousins, like the Audi Q5, simply cost way less, partially because they have subsidized prepaid service plans, which Porsche doesn't offer on this car. It's the same thing with the warranty. It's only 3 years, despite this vehicle sharing underpinnings with a whole bunch of cars that have 5-year warranties. But at least Porsche lets you buy extended warranties way out to about a decade to give you peace of mind. In terms of insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,475 to comprehensively insure a new Porsche Macan. Everybody's situation varies, and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, your driving history, and how you garage the car. And finally, fuel consumption, which really does come down to how much you exploit this vehicle's significant amount of power. Driven moderately, you'll be able to get maybe 11 litres per 100 Ks out of the 2.9 litre engine, which is pretty good. But of course, when you're on it, you should expect more like 15 or 16. So, you've jumped into the Macan, you're ready to take a drive, whether it's just down the shops or for a mountain road blast. The experience, it starts well with quite a tasty little exhaust note, nicely damped gear shifter, and you've got your drive mode dial here. I'll talk a bit more about that in a sec, but this thing is actually the quickest SUV we've ever tested. The Chasing Cars performance testing program has only been around for a few months, and we've tested about 70 cars, and the Macan GTS accelerates from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 4.07 seconds, which is quite a bit quicker than Porsche's claim of 4.3 seconds. Now, that's classic for Porsche. They love doing that, conservatively estimating 0 to 100 so that when you test it, you're pleasantly surprised. And we were pleasantly surprised, particularly because the result was repeatable. It wasn't a one-time fluke, but also because the braking performance is better than average. We were able to get the Macan GTS, which does have nice big beefy brakes, to stop in under 38 meters, which for quite a heavy mid-sized performance SUV isn't bad. The roll-on acceleration is also really luscious, and always accompanied by a superb soundtrack from the sports exhaust on the vehicle. But let's talk about the engine, because it is a real gem and it's kind of central to the experience of the Macan GTS. It's a 2.9 litre turbocharged petrol V6. In fact, it's twin turbo. And here it makes a claimed 324 kilowatts of power and 550 Newton meters of torque. You'll find this engine in a variety of other Volkswagen Group products, including in Porsche's Panamera and the Cayenne, but also in the Audi RS4 and RS5, plus more niche products like the S6. And it's an absolutely delightful engine. It's tractable, it's silky, it's smooth, it's incredibly refined, it sounds good, which isn't always the case for V6s, and it's just so linear and rewarding and sparkling. And it's actually these kinds of combustion engines which are the ones we say we'll miss when electrification takes over. It won't really be the Atmo 2 litre out of your Hyundai i30. It'll be stuff like this 2.9, one of my favorite 6-cylinder engines ever. It's excellent. The only problem for the Macan GTS is that you can get the same thing for a lot less money in the Macan S, which you can also customize more to my tastes. Now, in the Macan S, it's in a slightly lower state of tune, 280 kilowatts and 520 Newton meters. Mind you, if you ask some of the Macan truthers out there, they'll tell you that in reality, the tunes of the engines are much closer than the official numbers suggest. We're yet to put a Macan S through our performance testing program here at our test track, but we look forward to doing that soon and revealing how close the pair really are, or perhaps aren't. Now, when it comes to ride and handling, it really depends what kind of suspension package your Macan has. The GTS has a lowered version of the Macan's adaptive air suspension as standard. And because it's air, it does mean that the Macan does a reasonable job of being quite comfortable around town while being able to lower itself and become quite stiff when you're wanting to go fast on a curvy road. But even on the base suspension in a 4-cylinder Macan with fixed dampers, this SUV has basically the best body control and handling of any SUV. It is truly engaging to drive. There's no apology that you have to make for it being an SUV, because aside from the slightly raised driving position, it simply doesn't feel like an SUV. I know you've probably heard journalists and plenty of brochures telling you that other cars don't feel like SUVs, but they usually do. The Macan S, the Macan, and especially the Macan GTS, is not one of those vehicles. Now, by contrast, the cheaper S comes on steel springs but adaptive dampers as standard. However, you can option air suspension on that car, and I probably would, because it really gives the vehicle the best possible split personality between comfort and sport. The steering is crystal clear, the ratio is intuitive and natural, the front end does exactly what you would expect it to do, and the car has heaps of mechanical and chemical grip. Because it's so heavy, it does take a bit to make it step out, and once it does, you're aware you've got a lot of mass and inertia and power. But simply driving it straight and achieving the goal you want on a great curvy road gives you an immaculate result in the Macan, but especially in an S or a GTS when paired with the right engine. Now, the Macan will be going electric in future years, and it will sit in showrooms alongside the combustion version. And it'll be interesting to see whether Porsche's engineers are able to spread the magic to that car. I hope they are, but I know this is exactly the kind of sports SUV that I'll probably miss in about 10 years' time. So let me bring this right back to where I started. Should you shell out for the Macan GTS, or should you save your money and go for a nicely optioned Macan S? Well, to me, the answer is easy. I would take the S every time. It's just about as quick as the GTS, but it's more subtle. You can do more with it visually because you're not boxed in to the mods that you can do to the GTS, which are a lot tighter because this car really goes for maximum sportiness outside. With the S, you can make it a bit more of a Q car, a bit more of a luxury cruiser, but still with that gorgeous engine. And for me, that is perfect. But if you look at this Carmine Red GTS and you see like heart eyes emoji, then that's great, because this car makes it very easy to order a Macan with all the go fast bits without having to pick through Porsche's famously incredibly long options and accessory catalog. If you don't want to mess around with all that stuff, just go for a GTS. That's the answer to the question. I'm keen to know your opinion though, so let me know down below there in the comments. We try and get back to as many as we can, and we really appreciate the feedback, good or bad. While you're there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.